Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of IR. Today we're talking about humanitarian intervention. It's got a very specific meaning, so don't just sort of assume you know what it means. Let's make sure we got what the definition is, and we'll go from there. All right, humanitarian intervention. Que esta? What is it? What it basically means is using force to protect human rights. And let's just talk about what this means. I know it seems a little bit weird, but like, well, I'm trying to think of the best analogy to make here. So let me give you an analogy. Let's just see if this works. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I'm not going to re-record this. That's fine. So let's say you're in the store and you see, and it's not coronavirus time, so you can actually walk up to people, and you see a mom hitting her child. Can you, should you, do you, etc., go and stop the woman from hitting her child? That's kind of the idea here, is that the mom has a responsibility to protect her kid. If she is harming the kid, does that give you the right to step in and protect the kid on the kid's behalf? That's really the question here. It's the same thing, but instead of talking about moms and kids, and by the way, there's a lot of moral, legal questions just wrapped up in that analogy that we're not going to go into right now. But this is the same thing, is that the state, let's say a state like Burma, has a responsibility to protect its citizens. If it's not protecting its citizens in some way, meaning not protecting their human rights, do other states have the right to use force to protect human rights in those states? And you can understand why this would be a violation of sovereignty. Remember that word, sovereignty? The state is sovereign over its territory. So what gives a state like the United States the right to step into Burma and use force when only the state of Burma should be able to use force? That's the question. So use of force to protect other rights. So we have some things like stopping other uses of force. Like, for example, if a state is doing a genocide or ethnic cleansing or something to that degree, to sort of, again, using force to stop other uses of force. The other meaning of this is to use force to provide humanitarian assistance. So I'll give you an analogy. This is what happened in Somalia. So here's the coastline, here's water, and here's the port. I don't know what the port's name is, we'll just call it port. And then here's a village inland here. And so in 1990 something, what was it, 1991, 1990, the United States sent troops to Somalia because Somalia was having a horrible famine. The government was in collapse. There were warlords everywhere. And essentially the United States went into Somalia to provide humanitarian assistance, to get them food, medicine, water. Now, one of the things you need to do is you have to create humanitarian corridors. So here's the deal. So let's say that the United States comes in, they establish a military presence in the port, they're able to deliver supplies here to the port. How do they get it to the village? So one of the things that they do is they create these humanitarian corridors. So the military would then say, in this area, this strip, we're not going to provide security for the entire country. We're going to provide security from the port to here so that the goods can get through to the people that need them. That's a humanitarian corridor. Do you have to use force? You don't have to use force, but you have the ability to use force to protect that medicine and stuff going through and the people who are distributing it. And then, of course, just using force to protect humanitarian aid distribution. So, again, when I say use of force, we just mean the ability to use force. It could be that you do a humanitarian intervention and never fire a shot at all. That's fine. That's still, you have the ability to use force. So you're not just sending doctors, you're not just sending aid workers, you're not just sending water, but you're sending troops to protect these things as well. That is what we mean by humanitarian intervention. Now, is it legal? Under international law, is this legal? And I don't think you have to go too far from chapter 1 or 2, where we talked about sovereignty, to know that this is not really legal. There's only 2 times that a state can legally use force. One is in self-defense, and the second is if the UN Security Council authorizes it. So if the UN Security Council authorizes this operation like they did in Somalia in 1990, then it's totally legal, totally fine. For example, you see a woman is hitting, or a mother is hitting her child. You see this. If the policeman says to you, go stop that, it's perfectly legal to go do that, even though it's maybe the policeman's job, but it's still legal to do that. If the policeman tells you not to do that, then it's not legal to do that. If the policeman doesn't say anything, you got some question marks over you. Probably a no. You're not allowed to actually use force on other people. Maybe that's just how she punishes the child, and that's okay. Like your sensibilities, like you don't like spanking, and so you consider that hitting. So this is the same sort of idea here, is that in terms of legality, if the UN Security Council authorizes it, it is fine. But that's usually not what we talk about. We talk about humanitarian intervention. That is a definite kind here. The kind we're going to talk about for today, that's not really question mark. That's just whatever the UN Security Council authorizes is fine. What we're going to talk about is this idea of humanitarian intervention right here, but unilateral. In other words, can the United States on its own, without going to the UN or with the UN even saying no, say, screw the rest of you guys, we're going to go and protect these people? So it's where the state intervenes without UN Security Council authorization or that other government's consent. So here's the United States, here's Burma. They ask Burma, Burma says, nope, stay away. The UN says, nope, don't worry about it. The US still goes in and provides humanitarian assistance to the people here. That's what we're talking about. That is, by definition, illegal. In the same way that it's probably by definition illegal for you to go over and like put your hands on the mom to stop her from doing this. It doesn't mean that it's not right morally, but legally you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. So its unilateral use of force is illegal. The question, of course, then, is it moral? In other words, even if it's illegal, should we still do it? That's going to be the conversation we're going to have today. It's a real tough one. Now, I'll give you a quick example. Rwanda, 1994, there's a genocide happening. And the UN Security Council had met several times about this, but obviously the UN Security Council is not, an ideal situation. The UN Security Council declined to act to stop it. They had sent they had sent peacekeepers over to Rwanda, but before the genocide, they had withdrawn many of them just because they knew something was going to happen and they didn't want those people to be the peacekeepers to be killed in that. So the question then becomes, can the U.S. prevent force? And I don't just mean does it have the ability in terms of military technology and all that to do that, but legally, can it do it? The answer is probably no, but should the U.S. use force to prevent it? Should the United States have used force to stop the genocide in Rwanda? That's really what it comes down to. Is it legal? No. Is it moral? That's a different conversation that we have to have. Another question that's raised by this is, should foreign policy be moral at all? Now, let me just say right now, if you're a realist, that's a real tricky question. Realism would say there is no such thing as moral foreign policy. There's only what you can do and what you can't do. But that being said, most of us still think about the world in moral terms. And if the United States knows a genocide is happening in the world and doesn't do anything about it, do you think that the United States has some sort of blame? Even though it's acting legally, does it have some sort of guilt, blame, whatever? Do you, as an American citizen, have that? So we're going to look at a couple examples before we start diving into this. Just get some examples out there and sort of see what has been done in terms of humanitarian intervention. So the first thing you're going to watch is Cyclone Nargis.